Why Khalistan? What led up to the point at which Jarnail Singh Bhindranwala and his companions went down in a hail of gunfire at the Akal Takht, spawning what became the militant movement for Khalistan? The history of the 10 Gurus and the development of Sikhism during the Guru period provides the ideological base for Khalistani activism, but a series of events that took place from the death of the last Guru in 1708, until the rise of Bhindranwala in the 1970s, pushed a section of the Sikh community to a position of readiness for militancy, to a point at which the rhetorical seeds of members of the Damdami Taksal, and the Akand Kirtani Jatthar, found fertile soil. Causes proximate and ultimate. The link between religion and politics in Sikh tradition was made firm through the succession of gurus from Guru Nanak to Guru Gobind Singh. But some of the greatest heroes of the Sikhs lived after this period, when Guru had become enshrined not in individuals, but in the dual Guru Granth Guru Panth formulation. The first was Banda Singh, a hermit who was converted to Sikhism by Guru Gobind Singh. Banda means slave to Guru. Banda Singh led Khalsa warriors in a raid on Sirhind, whose ruler had killed the Guru's sons, and was titled Bahadur, brave, by Guru Gobind Singh. After Guru Gobind Singh's death, Banda Singh Bahadur and his band took over most of southeastern Punjab, where they proclaimed a republic in the name of the Gurus. They fought with Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah, and finally were starved into submission by his successor. Banda Singh Bahadur was eventually marched to Delhi in chains, forced to kill his own infant son, and executed along with other Sikh prisoners. Banda Singh Bahadur is particularly important in Sikh history, because he was the first individual who was not a guru, but nevertheless assumed a leadership role. His fearlessness in battle and stoicism through his defeat, eclipses, in Sikh minds, other aspects of his career like his multiple wives and his regal lifestyle. It should by now be clear that courage eclipses a lot for militant Sikhs. As one leader commented when news of the Chechen rebellion broke out in 1994, "They are fighting with so much courage, they must be right." But Banda Singh's band of warriors was certainly the first real guerrilla force, led not by a guru, but by an ordinary human being, to which contemporary militants can look for inspiration. By the late 1730s, the Khalsa had regrouped under Nawab Kapoor Singh, who gathered local chieftains together in a kind of coalition force called the Dal Khalsa, the Khalsa Army. The militant group started by Gurjinder Singh in modern times, took its name from this group. The Dal Khalsa's fame stems from its bloody encounters with the Afghans, who were attacking the Mughals from the west, at the same time as the British had begun their encroachment from the east. The so-called Lesser Holocaust, Shoata Galogara, of the Sikhs occurred in 1747, when Sikhs were slaughtered at Kanhawan by the Mughal forces from Lahore. In 1762, the Dal Khalsa faced a different enemy, the Afghan forces of Ahmed Shah Abdali, at Malarkotla, a battle in which thousands of Sikhs, possibly as many as 20,000, were killed in what is now called the Greater Holocaust, Vadar Galogara. After the massacre, Ahmed Shah Abdali attacked Amritsar, destroying the Golden Temple complex. But the Sikhs rose up in response and eventually defeated the Afghans, putting the whole of Punjab under Sikh control for the first time in history. The history of the Dal Khalsa and the Afghan wars is important for understanding what the Khalistani militancy has become today, not only because it ended up creating the only Sikh state that has ever existed, but because the organization of guerrilla forces in the Dal Khalsa was a direct foreshadowing of how Khalistani militants are organized today. The Dal Khalsa was not really an army, or Dal, in the conventional sense. It was a loose confederation of independent administrative districts, or misls. At the height of the Dal Khalsa, there were 12 such misls with their own militias, varying in size from over 10,000, to just a few hundred members. They would get together when military exigency demanded coordination of action, but otherwise acted with relative autonomy. The leaders of the militias that comprised the Dal Khalsa also got together on specific religious occasions, and took decisions that were sanctified by the presence of Guru Granth Sahib, and then proclaimed as Guru Mata, or wishes of the Guru. This model was obviously successful in confrontation with the Afghans, and fits well the Punjabi cultural characteristics of individualism and self-reliance, while drawing on the authority of religion, to convey decisions to the population as a whole. It is less clear, as we shall see, that it is the most effective strategy for Khalistani Sikhs confronting India today. There is a sideline to the story of the Dal Khalsa, however, which is worth narrating, for it demonstrates the very deep awareness of history that permeates the Sikh community. The chieftains of Malerkotla, site of the Vadar Galogara, were members of the Sirhind court, and the Nawab of Malerkotla and his forces had participated in battles against Guru Gobind Singh at Anandpur Sahib. But when the governor of Sirhind, Wazir Khan, took Guru Gobind Singh's two younger sons into custody, the Nawab of Malerkotla intervened on their behalf. Stating that they refused to bow before any other than Akal Purukh, or God, the two young boys prompted the wrath of Wazir Khan, who proposed to execute them. But the Nawab of Malerkotla, one Sher Muhammad Khan, pointed out that while the execution of a rebel like Guru Gobind Singh would be in accordance with Islamic law, there was no provision for the execution of children. They were bricked up inside a wall nonetheless, but Sikhs have never forgotten the attempt of Sher Muhammad Khan to intercede on behalf of the Guru's sons. In continuing gratitude for this episode, and in spite of the Holocaust of the Afghan wars, Sikhs protected the Muslims of Malerkotla during the bloodshed of partition in 1947, when Muslims were killing Sikhs and Hindus in West Punjab and Sikhs and Hindus were slaughtering Muslims in East Punjab. As a result of Sikh protection during the partition massacres, Malerkotla remains today an idiosyncratic town with a substantial Muslim presence. It has in the recent past elected a Muslim MLA to the Punjab Assembly on the Akali ticket, and he wore an Akali blue turban despite his Muslim name and affiliation. The empire of Ranjit Singh, established amid the contending Rajput, Gurkha and Maratha powers of the region, made its peace with the advancing British, by signing a treaty of friendship in 1809. Although Maharaja Ranjit Singh was a Sikh, his administration incorporated not only persons of various ethnic and religious communities of Punjab, but also stray Europeans. He made large endowments to Gurudwaras, and under his administration the upper floors of the Akal Takht, which would later shelter Bhindranwala and his band, were added. The Harmandir Sahib was covered in its defining gold leaf. The separation of church and state in the empire meant a general atmosphere of tolerance and ecumenicism. However, most would agree with Mahmud Ali's assessment: he had raised the most modern native instrument of state in 19th century India. This was despite being illiterate, enamored of strong drink, dazzling jewels, like the Koh-i-Noor diamond, and women. Ranjit Singh built up a technically advanced, unified army on what was left of the Dal Khalsa guerrilla forces, with a clear chain of command from the centralized authority down to the Jothars, or brigades, after which the Jothars of recent activism are named. He began a vigorous program of expansion from Kashmir in the north, to the Khyber in the west, regions where Ranjit Singh's reign is remembered less fondly than in the Punjab heartland. But in the east were the British, and after Ranjit Singh's death, his less effective successors eventually ended up ceding the empire to the expanding colonialists. The last, Maharaja Dalip Singh, was converted to Christianity in his youth, but later re-embraced Sikhism. There is an extensive historical literature, of course, about how the British made their way into India, principality by principality, state by state. The long and short of the interaction between the Sikhs and the British was that a series of battles were fought, identified as the First and the Second Anglo-Sikh Wars, and the end result was that Punjab was annexed to the crown. The fighting abilities of the Sikhs were not lost on the British, however, despite their eventual loss of sovereignty. Some of the British observers at the time fueled the mythos of Sikh soldiery, drawn on still now for pithy quotes about Sikh military prowess. One British subaltern wrote, "The Sikhs fought like devils, such a mass of men I never set eye on, and as plucky as lions, they ran right on the bayonets of the 24th Regiment, and struck at their assailants when they were transfixed." When they took over, they lost no time in recruiting those top-notch fighters to their own military endeavors. Already by 1857, the time of the first major mutiny against British rule, Sikh troops from the princely states were serving with the British Indian Army, and after that, Sikhs came to serve in that army out of all proportion to their numbers in the total population. This trend continued even after independence. Khushwant Singh notes that at some points, Sikhs comprised a fifth of the total Indian army. After the threatening but unsuccessful mutiny, a special Viceroy's Commission was created to reform the armed services, along with a host of other reforms, intended to thwart the possibility of such rebellion in future. The reform of the army benefited Sikhs in particular, who were labelled a martial race in the British biopolitical scheme. A Punjabization of the infantry regiments resulted in the number of Sikh battalions increasing in 1914, while all other groups except the Nepalese Gurkhas, another martial race, declined. During World War I, numbers of Sikh troops fighting for the British increased from 35,000 to 100,000. More to the point in terms of the history of Sikh identity, the British capitalized on, and encouraged the observance of the 5Ks by Sikh soldiers. This preference for Amrit-Hari Sikhs by British recruiters itself, encouraged initiations into the Khalsa among a population increasingly dependent on income from service in the armed forces. At the same time as martial Sikh identity received this military boost from the colonialist power, a reform movement called the Arya Samaj, in which many Sikhs had originally been interested, took a decided turn toward Hindu messianization. Arya Samaj activities focused on absorbing Sikhs into the broader Hindu community, prompted the creation of a Sikh organization, the Singh Sabha, or Assembly of Lions, which would assert a separate Sikh identity, and work toward purging Sikhism of various Hindu elements that had crept into it. A famous pamphlet of the Singh Sabha movement was called, "We Are Not Hindus." The Singh Sabha movement represented the consolidation of a particular, relatively uniform understanding of what Sikhism was, which some scholars emphasize was imposed on what had been previously a much more fluid situation. Significant also is the fact that the Singh Sabha, by the turn of the century, had become powerful not only in India, but among Sikhs overseas too. The chief Khalsa Diwan, set up to coordinate all the branches of the Singh Sabha, was established in Amritsar, but a Khalsa Diwan movement that would link Gurudwaras across North America, was begun as well. From this early twinkling of modern Sikh identity, then, emphasized as uniform, unique, and separate from Hinduism, the Panth was envisioned as a transnational entity, with a base in Punjab, to be sure, but with important tentacles extending across oceans. Of particular interest is the formation, at about the same time, of the primarily Sikh Gadhar or mutiny movement, which had an important base in Northern California. The Gadhar movement against colonialism gathered steam after what was called the Komagata Maru incident, when a Japanese ship loaded with potential Sikh immigrants was refused landing in Vancouver and sent back to India, where 23 of the returnees were shot as troublemakers, and others formed the nucleus of an armed resistance movement. The entire Gadhar episode was critical to later developments in two ways. First, it underscored the important role played by the Sikh diaspora and the immigration policies of the countries that hosted it, with networks set up during Gadhar times still used today by Khalistani activists abroad. Second, the remnants of the Gadar rebellion in India formed the basis of what became the Babar Akalis, who rejected the Gandhian scheme of nonviolence as a means of achieving independence. Today's Babar Khalsa was named after them. The potentially dangerous nationalism represented by the Gadhar rebellion drew British and Sikhs apart at home in India, even as Sikhs were being sacrificed in large numbers in British interests during World War I. On April 13, 1919, came the straw that broke the camel's back. Several thousand people had gathered in a walled compound called Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar, to protest the enactment of the Rowlatt Bills, set up to enable the government to curb political activism, by circumventing normal legal procedures. Sikhs also gathered nearby to commemorate the birthday of the Khalsa. The protesters in Jallianwala Bagh were fired upon, by Brigadier General R.E.H. Dyer, of the British Army. Nearly 400 were killed, and more than 1,200 wounded in this massacre, which permanently alienated much of the Sikh population from the British. Michael O'Dwyer, governor of Punjab at the time, was assassinated more than 20 years later in London, a fact which Khalistani Sikhs frequently repeat, as an illustration of their patience in exacting revenge. A Sikh movement was started called the Akali Dal, the Eternal Army, whose aim was to reform the Gurudwara system, in particular replacing the British-nominated administrators of major shrines, with Sikhs' own choices. The fact that the Akal Takht had presented Dyer with a robe of honour after the slaughter at Jallianwala Bagh, made clear to many Sikhs, the British influence on the major shrines. In addition, officers at local Gurudwaras had inherited their positions, and corruption was rampant. The committee the Akali Dal set up, the Shromani Gurudwara Prabandhak Committee, Apex Temple Management Committee, SGPC, eventually did take over control of the Gurudwaras, through the Sikh Gurudwara Act of 1925, and this religious parliament of the Sikhs, remains a powerful force in Sikh political life today. In the campaign for the SGPC, nonviolent demonstrations by the Akalis had resulted in nearly 400 dead, 2,000 wounded, and 30,000 jailed. The nonviolence of the Akali Dal in this period is cited today, as a counterexample to the claim that Sikhs are somehow inherently violent, or too quick on the trigger. Sikhs also participated heavily in the renowned civil disobedience movement led by Mahatma Gandhi. At the same time, however, there were Sikhs who did choose to take up arms. The most famous among these was Bhagat Singh, who killed a British policeman, who had assaulted a nationalist leader. Bhagat Singh was executed for this act of terrorism in 1931, and many Sikhs today feel he is unjustly neglected in most histories of the anti-colonial movement. During World War II, many Sikhs continued to serve with valor in the British Indian Army. Others, however, played a crucial role in setting up the Indian National Army, which under the guidance of Germany and Japan, would attempt a challenge to the Allied powers in South Asia, in 1941 to 1942. Some Sikhs joined the Hindu-dominated but explicitly secular Congress Party, while others went with the nearly wholly Sikh Akali Dal. After the war, these conflicts within the Sikh community were brought to a head, in the discussions surrounding independence and partition. The fact that the Akalis demanded a separate Sikh homeland in 1946, but never effectively negotiated for such a state, is seen by Khalistanis as the great missed opportunity of history. An Akali Dal resolution of March 1946, asserted a separate Sikh state as a primary goal. Whereas the Sikhs, being attached to Punjab by intimate bonds of holy shrines, prosperity, language, traditions, and history, claim it as their homeland and holy land, and which the British took as a trust from the last Sikh ruler during his minority, and whereas the entity of the Sikhs is being threatened on account of the persistent demand for Pakistan by the Muslims on the one hand, and the danger of absorption by the Hindus on the other, the Executive Committee of the Shromani Akali Dal demands, for the preservation and protection of the religious, cultural, and economic rights of the Sikhs, the creation of a Sikh state. The Crips mission, organized to discuss India's future with the major concerned parties, ignored the Akali demand. In the eventual cabinet mission plan, Punjab was bifurcated, approximately the western two-thirds, going to Muslim majority and probably Islamic Pakistan, and the eastern third, going to Hindu majority, but avowedly secular and pluralist India. Mahatma Gandhi made a kind of pledge to the Sikhs at the time, which has resurfaced in the Khalistani community today. In an essay on communal unity, he wrote, "I ask you to accept my word, and the resolution of the Congress, that it will not betray a single individual, much less a community. Our Sikh friends have no reason to fear that it would betray them, for, the moment it does so, the Congress would not only thereby seal its doom, but that of the country too. Moreover, the Sikhs are a brave people. They know how to safeguard their rights by exercise of arms if it should ever come to that. It should be noted that Gandhi also made many statements that Khalistanis today find anathema, such as that all the Sikh gurus were Hindus, and that Sikhism is part of the broader Hindu tradition. While he believed that Indian nationalism must override communal impulses, his concurrent message that Hinduism was the ocean into which the rivers of all other faiths flow, alienated the non-Hindu minorities. Khalistani Sikhs, while drawing on Gandhi's comment about the safeguarding of rights by exercise of arms, retain a deeply ambivalent attitude toward him. In the bloodshed following the partition decision, Muslims in India fled across the border to Pakistan, while Sikhs and Hindus in Pakistan fled across the other direction to India. Estimates of people killed in Punjab, during what was the largest mass migration in history, range from 200,000 to 500,000, with most sources going with the higher figure. And the Sikhs left behind in Pakistan some 200 shrines, most significantly the birthplace of the founder, Guru Nanak, Nankana Sahib. The way in which administrative districts were drawn up in post-independence India, meant that Sikhs would not form a majority in any state, and indeed would probably be able to elect representatives in only a few constituencies in Punjab, where they were particularly concentrated. This was a central problem with the original demand for a Sikhistan. Sikhs did not form a clear majority in any particular area. This situation is, of course, one of the great inadequacies of democratic representation based on demography, as any advocate of minority rights soon learns. In independent India, the situation was exacerbated by a vibrant Hindu revivalist movement called the Bharatiya Jan Sangh, ancestral to today's successful Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP, which attempted to claim the Indian heritage as a Hindu heritage, and the Indian state as a Hindu state. It was linked to the Hindu militant organization, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS, one of whose members killed Mahatma Gandhi for being too conciliatory to Muslims. The Bharatiya Jan Sangh spearheaded the campaign for Hindu domination in the Punjab region, by urging Hindu Punjabis to list Hindi, not Punjabi, as their mother tongue on the first national census. This critical first census in 1951, revealed some very interesting things about Punjab. It showed the Hindu-Sikh ratio as about 62% to 35%, even though 80% of all the Sikhs in India resided in Punjab. Again, the point drawn from this was that because of numbers, the Sikhs might be left without effective representation. But it also showed an important class breakdown that would become critical to the separatist insurgency today, that most of the Punjabi Sikhs lived in villages and worked in agriculture, while most of the Punjabi Hindus lived in cities and worked in trades and professions. The antagonism between farmers and urbanites finds a voice in much Khalistani narrative, as it does also in the anti-Khalistani rhetoric, that typically emphasizes the unintellectual and unsophisticated quality of the militants. The Sikhs were not the only minority group that found itself without an obvious means of representing themselves in the new democratic arena, and in 1953, Prime Minister Nehru was forced to set up a states reorganization commission, to see to the redrawing of boundaries on more equitable lines. Nehru was adamant, however, that in secular India, such boundaries would never be drawn based on religion, and what ended up happening was that language was used as a means of drawing boundary lines around particular communities. In the Punjab case, however, because of the listing of Hindi rather than Punjabi as the mother tongue of the majority Hindu population, the commission refused to countenance a redistricting along linguistic lines. This was the beginning of the Punjabi Suba movement, an agitation for the redrawing of state boundaries, that would take up the energies of the Akali Dal for over a decade. Master Tara Singh, the leader of the Morcha, or protest for Punjabi Suba, vowed to fast unto death for this cause, but ignominiously retreated from his fast at the last moment. Various other nonviolent protests arose on behalf of Punjabi Suba, but at the same time Sikhs continued to serve in the Indian armed forces, well out of proportion to their percentage in the overall population. This period is used now as an example, that Sikhs know how to be the loyal opposition when given a chance. It was only after Sikh soldiers' dazzling performance in the 1965 war with Pakistan, that concessions were made with regard to Punjabi Suba, the state of Punjab. From the viewpoint of Sikhs, their loyalty through the war had been rewarded. The same retired colonel, who called the performance of the Sikhs during the 1965 war dazzling, told me that it is the utter disillusionment of Sikh officers in the Indian Army today, that carries the most serious portents for further trouble. They feel, he asserted, that their service through multiple wars since independence, is at this point not only not being rewarded, but is being mocked because of suspicion of their Khalistani sympathies. This suspicion itself, he said, which results in being passed over for promotions, and otherwise sidestepped in the military scheme of things, is much more a source of alienation, than the actual Khalistan movement ever would have been. A second retired officer, also a colonel, entirely agreed with this assessment. Particularly after having helped suppress the massive desertions and mutinies occurring among Sikh troops after Operation Blue Star, this second individual said, Sikh officers might have expected more from the government they chose to serve. With the accession of Indira Gandhi to power in 1966, Punjab's boundaries were redrawn, with the Hindi-speaking plains in the east, becoming what is now the state of Haryana, the Himalayan foothill region becoming Himachal Pradesh, and the remainder becoming Punjab. There were Hindu-Sikh riots in several cities following the announcement of Punjabi Suba. But after the redrawing, Sikhs constituted 56%, a bare majority in Punjab state, with Sikh minorities in the other two new entities. The city of Chandigarh was appointed as the joint capital of Punjab and Haryana, which has been a point of contention ever since. The dramatic fast unto death for Chandigarh, accomplished by Darshan Singh Firooman in 1969, represents one of the few martyrdoms by fasting, not traditionally a Sikh tactic in Sikh history. His fast also redeemed Sikh honor after the failed fast of Tara Singh, and he is considered a hero today. His example was followed by Sant Fateh Singh, Master Tara Singh's replacement as Akali Dal leader, who vowed a similar death, if Chandigarh was not awarded to Punjab alone. But Indira Gandhi interceded, suggesting that Chandigarh be exchanged for two Hindu-majority districts in current Punjab, Aborhar and Fazilka. Fateh Singh broke his fast, but the issue remains unresolved and still is. Neither Punjab nor Haryana wanted to give up what they had. The same was true for water control, important for both irrigation and electricity. The three rivers of Indian Punjab, Beas, Ravi, and Sutlej, are scarce resources in the region, and everybody wants them. In a democratic system, pleasing the most numerous or most important constituents, can sometimes subvert the cause of justice. Many Sikhs came to feel that the central government and Indira Gandhi had sold out the Sikhs of Punjab, with their agriculturalists' vital dependence on water, for other interests. Today, after both peaceful negotiations and horrific bloodshed, crucial water questions like the digging of the Sutlej-Yamuna link canal, which would divert Punjab's water to Haryana, remain unresolved. Two engineers working on the SYL canal were killed by Khalistani militants in 1990, to publicize the continuing importance of the water question. The Green Revolution strategy of agricultural development in the 1960s, led to the extension and deepening of the capitalist mode of production in Punjab agriculture. The commodification of social life, as a consequence of increasing capitalist modernization in Punjab's rural society, resulted in several forms of fissures in social practices and cultural norms. Two diametrically opposite ideological currents emerged as a response to this socio-cultural crisis. 1. A radical Marxism-inspired vision of an alternative collectivist socialist life, the other, a religious revivalist vision of a pure Sikh way of life. The radical vision became especially popular with Sikh students in the universities, and the professional medical and engineering colleges. Many of these students were the first generation of their rural families to enter higher education. The radicalization of student and youth movements all over the world in the late 1960s also contributed to the spread of Marxist ideas among the educated Punjabi rural youth. The specific form this Marxist influence in Punjab took, was the emergence of the Maoist Naxalite movement in Punjab, from the late 1960s, and mid-1970s. The Maoist emphasis on armed struggle, gelled very well with the Sikh tradition, and contributed further to the valorization of Sikh identity. While the Maoist movement was crushed through state terror by the mid-1970s, its intellectual and political legacy did leave some impact on Punjab's political culture. The egalitarianism derived from the Marxist tradition, coexisted with that of the Sikh tradition. Some isolated intellectual attempts were made, towards a critical synthesis of the two traditions, but the dominant practice remained one of uncritical coexistence. This coexistence on one hand, radicalized the intellectual vocabulary of the Punjabi Sikh intelligentsia, and on the other contributed to strengthening Sikh identity. Maoist internationalism, by weakening the ideological appeal of Indian nationalism among the Punjabi Sikh intelligentsia, made its own indirect contribution to the strengthening of separate Sikh identity. It is not surprising, therefore, that later on some activists from the Naxalite tradition, either joined or aligned with a section of the Sikh militants, who campaigned for a separate Sikh homeland of Khalistan. Ajmer Singh is an example of a former Naxalite turned supporter of the Sikh militancy. The collapse of the Naxalite movement in the mid-1970s, was followed by the emergence of religious revivalist currents, though there is no direct causal link between the two. The indirect link, however, can be imagined. The political vacuum created by the defeat of the Naxalite movement, did contribute to creating a fertile ground for the emergence of alternative visions, and the Sikh religious vision which had remained dormant in the previous decade, seemed to acquire added attraction in the new context. A number of Sikh revivalist groups, started preaching the superiority of a simple Sikh ethical and spiritual way of life, over the decadent consumerist style of life, penetrating the rural society of Punjab, as a result of the degenerative forms of capitalist modernization. This degenerative form of modernization, expressed itself in the menacing spread of alcoholism, smoking, drug addiction, pornographic literature, lewd music, and vulgar cinema. Pritam Singh, 1987. The religious revivalist groups, found a responsive audience among the rural Sikh population, when they launched a moral and ideological crusade against this degenerative form of capitalist modernization. Though many organizations and individuals played a crucial role in the Sikh revivalist movement, it was Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwala who, after becoming the head of the Sikh Orthodox organization, Damdami Taksal in 1977, came to occupy the central role, and eventually to symbolize the Sikh revivalist movement. The Green Revolution was highly successful in Punjab in technical terms, but it created its own set of problems as well. Primary among these was that advances in agricultural technology, made cultivators more dependent than ever before, on factors beyond their immediate control, such as the price of fertilizer, the availability of diesel fuel, and the accessibility of credit. The level of education skyrocketed, as Punjab's overall wealth grew, but employment opportunities for educated people remained restricted. Cheap migrant labor brought in from other states, pushed Punjab's unskilled workforce into unemployment as well. The conditions that developed were in a sense an explosion waiting to happen. Farmers with a strong cultural tradition of self-reliance, found themselves suddenly beholden to the decisions of others, and a growing number of educated people without jobs milled about the cities. When these people belong to a religious community, historically perceived as having suffered discrimination at the hands of the majority community, which dominates the government now making the decisions that affect Sikhs, tension is bound to arise. In 1973 the demand for Chandigarh, the issues surrounding water and hydroelectric power, and the questions relating to agriculture and economic opportunity in Punjab, were expressed in a document drawn up by the Akali Dal, called the Anandpur Sahib Resolution, referred to as the ASR. Anandpur Sahib was the place where Guru Gobind Singh is believed to have created the Khalsa, a historical resonance to which Sikhs would be particularly sensitive. The ASR also called for a general devolution of power from the central government to the states, and Indira Gandhi treated it as a secessionist document. Nowhere in it was a separate Sikh state mentioned, however, and its push toward a looser federation of states has been echoed in other parts of India as well. In the current Khalistani context, the Anandpur Sahib resolution seems a rather moderate assertion of rights within the overall framework of India. But there was one big problem with the ASR, aside from the question of whether its demands could feasibly be met. That was the failure of the Akali Dal to poll a majority of the people in Punjab, even though it claimed to speak for all of the Sikhs. The Sikhs were only 56% of the population, and many of them, especially urbanites and non-Jats, voted for Congress. How could the central government of a country committed to democracy based not on communal representation, but on individual votes, accede to demands like those put forth in the ASR? Most Indians agreed that it couldn't. But the manner in which the demands were dealt with inflamed the sense of indignity of many Akalis, who felt they were not being listened to, and pushed some toward further extremism. A former state finance minister residing in London, Dr. Jagjit Singh Chauhan, started a cry for Khalistan. Only a few joined him at the time, and the cry was widely seen as an absurd pipe dream. The discussion surrounding the Anandpur Sahib resolution was abruptly halted by Indira Gandhi's imposition of a state of emergency in 1975. The calls for devolution of power were met with an assertion of centralized power that shocked the world. In Punjab, resistance to the emergency was open and protracted. The Akali Dal, newly energized, led the nonviolent Morcha for Democratic Freedoms. The Damdami Taksal, as we have seen, joined in this nonviolent protest and eventually spawned, with some members of the Akand Kirtni Jatthar, a violent one.